Hey everyone, so I just want to offer a brief recap of some of the work that we did in class today with CSS styling and classes that we hadn't touched on in the videos you reviewed for tonight's class. So where I have sort of reset my page to here is about where we got with the first video from this week, which is basically I've created a div, I've added the style attribute, and a couple of properties. So again, color refers to text color, not to the color of the div, though that might seem like it should make sense. And I set my border property to 5 pixels solid and red. As we saw in class, a really good way to sort of find out what styles are possible is I still use the W3C schools. I think the Mozilla reference is also a good one. I think I'm sort of used to the W3C schools because of the way it lists individual properties. If you encounter specific like sort of functional issues with CSS, I think the Mozilla guide is sort of much better background reading for that. So at this stage, the W3C schools might suit you well, but I think you'll probably find within a couple weeks that the Mozilla reference will definitely be better. But either way, obviously use whatever you prefer. And oh, this is interesting. Here's a color picker. So here we are. So if you want to play around with colors, here's a nice little feature to get you some pretty pinks and fuchsias and greens and things. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to change this. Whoops. So anyhow, we saw that we could do this, and of course, if we wanted to have more than one div, we could simply copy and paste them, but of course the problem then becomes for every property that I have and I have repeated, if I start to then build this out and add a third, let's say I decide I want to do, I don't know, something with, okay, I want to do something with the background color. Let's make this really intense. Background color, there we are. So I could then set it to whatever this is. Right? And again, I can just chain these along, but if I want them to look similar because they're sort of similar elements, and I've done it this way, then I'm going to have a lot of editing to do, a lot of text editing by hand. Wow, that is pretty awful. Okay, so now that we've created an extremely unpleasant look, let's refactor it so that we can spread it around, or really clean it up. So the first thing that I'm going to do here, and again, this is just to reiterate that when we put things inside the head tags, in between the head tags, when they're things that we want the browser to process before it tries to essentially interpret the visual elements of the page. And it's for this reason that when we have CSS in the page like this, we put our style tags in the head, right? Because if it hasn't already processed the styles, if it gets to the body and is trying to reference where those styles are, it won't have them yet, right? So again, the sort of analogy that we use about the computer reading the way that we read in English, top to bottom, left to right, is actually very salient here as well. So again, I want to start with commenting, and it's a similar style to what we use in JavaScript. So we start with the / and the asterisk, and I'm just going to sort of say, define a CSS class to apply to my divs. This class will have pink text, a red border, and a bright green background. Now, I expect all of you to choose better looking things than I have. I'm giving you a lot of room here to improve. So now I need to define my class. And so again, reminding you that the syntax for creating a class is to start with a dot, and then I'm going to give it a name. And so in this case, I'm just going to call it hideous. Very simple. And so CSS class has curly braces. And again, just to note some of the things that Aptana does for me. So if I, write a curly brace, it automatically closes it, and it actually positions my cursor in between it. So I can just hit return, and again, it does this indenting for me. So it really is putting some effort into making this more readable. Sort of sticking with the defaults is very helpful here. So again, on that notion of readability, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to copy these properties one by one, whoops, right, and paste them in. I want to give each one its own line, and that just makes it easier for me to see sort of what's going on when I look at a class. And I've got these 3, right? So here's my hideous class. Aptly named, I think. As I said, descriptive names are important. And I will make a note that CSS class names must begin with a dot. Let's leave that. So now I've defined the class, but when I'm using a class, the name of the attribute that I have to apply to the div is class, not style. Okay? So I'm going to go ahead and actually just delete this entire style tag. I find that a little bit easier, but do as you will. And so again, I'm just going to start by creating the empty class tag on both of these, and in fact I can copy this. You'll notice I do a lot of copying and pasting, and the reason is simple. It's just easier to not have typos that way. So now I have 2 empty class tags, and I can just go ahead and copy this class name in between those double quotes, right? So again, I want to make sure that it turns green, because that lets me know I haven't, gotten it outside the quote somehow. And I'm going to come back here and again to reiterate that what I am hoping for is that nothing changes, right? Because I haven't changed the values of those properties. I've actually just kind of moved them and factored them out, and so I reload the page and indeed nothing happens. Again, the advantage to this is that should I decide that I don't want a hideous background color and I want to actually make this look, let's say, halfway decent, I might do, I'm not going to go very far with the halfway decent here, but I might choose a sort of light gray background, dark gray text, and maybe my teal border here. Okay, so it's a little bit more appealing, a little less hideous, but as we see, of course, it applies to both of them. So I encourage you to explore what kind of CSS properties, sort of how they operate. One thing you'll see is that with things like border, we can get very, very specific. In other words, we can have the top border and bottom border be different colors and be different sizes and stuff. Those are not things you're going to want to use a lot. So I think it's helpful. I would focus on things that are sort of about font. Maybe play around with margins, right? Margins have to do with how much space there is between that border and your text or any elements that sort of float around in there. I'm sorry, actually that's not true. The margin is between the divs. Padding is what will determine the distance between the text and the border. Maybe some text decoration. Yeah, this is some good just sort of basic stuff, but stick with things like fonts, background colors, borders, margin, and padding. Look to those first, and mess around with them. Those are the ones that you're going to use the most, especially in these early stages. So yeah, that is pretty much it. Hopefully this has been a clear enough reference for what you need to do for your assignment. One last thing, just as I kept alleging that we would cover this in class and then I didn't, just to give you a quick walkthrough of these and remind you that this resource is here, right? And so again, just as we saw, I think maybe this will make a little bit more sense now actually that we've had our class discussion. So again, this idea that we have different types of nouns, we have different types of variables, right? Next week we're going to look at functions, which are sort of actions, so we'll look at conditionals, loops, and functions, and those are the verbs of our JavaScript programming language. Again, this just sort of reiterates the ways that we can tell what kind of data type something is, right? Quotes if it's a string, brackets if it's an array, braces if it's an object, the parentheses, right? So this is what we saw with the console log if it's a function. And And here's where we start talking about, oh, my Piers Morgan reference disappeared. It's weird that you can see it in the preview. So again, as you approach your assignment this weekend, hopefully this will sort of make some sense. Piers Morgan, a CNN talk show host and former British newspaper editor, was interviewed late last year by London police. Okay, you can read that. Okay, so here's how we might take these attributes about Piers Morgan and translate them to code. Take a look at this, the way this function interview is set up. But you see right here we have variable Piers Morgan, and here is, you know, he is an object with a property. He has a job, and it's CNN talk show host. Likewise, we have in the second graph we have some additional information. We have a list of previous jobs that he's held. We have, you know, a Boolean about whether or not he's been charged, true or false. Has he been charged with a crime? Not yet. Again, more properties about him. Some of this is going a little bit more when we start manipulating arrays, manipulating lists. But again, just, you know, take a look at this, sort of get familiar with the way that it's laid out. And a lot of this is stuff we sort of talked about in class. Actually, this is a nice reference to one of the visualizations we saw yesterday, right? So yeah, so that's pretty much it. If you have any questions, please post them to discussion section on lore. Your readings are already posted, and I will have some office hours on Friday. If you have any urgent need to meet, please let me know. I am out of town tomorrow, but I will be back midday Friday. It should be around during the lunch hour, as well as later on that evening if needed. All right. Great class this week, and we'll see you in a few days. Take care.